Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I thought I would answer the two questions that I get asked the most with regard to crossovers and transitions. The first one is, would you please do a transition for somebody who's had a near-death experience? And the second one is, what happens after we go into the light? As far as the near-death experience question goes, that's easily dealt with because the answer is right there in the name, near-death experience. Somebody who's had a near-death experience didn't die. They were close to death, but they came back and now they're telling us about it. And I know they say, well, I died and then I saw Jesus or my parents were there or whatever. They didn't actually, factually, technically die. Because if they did, they wouldn't be here telling us about it. The way death works, as far as I can tell from the pictures I've done so far, is that first of all, the heart stops. That means that blood is no longer getting to the brain. Eventually, the brain stops because there's no blood getting to the brain. And once the brain stops, then the body is dead, but the human consciousness continues for about another 3 minutes after the physical body dies. That's when a transition happens between the death of the physical body and the consciousness dwindling away to nothing. At that point, we enter the light. Now, what happens when the brain is dying is that I guess it releases chemicals, or there are chemical reactions at that point, and it's these that conjure up the images from the memory. And so, yes, people see their parents, they see bright lights, they see a tunnel, they see Jesus, but that's part of the chemical reactions going on inside the brain as it dies, as it's deprived of blood. And so when people say they've had a near-death experience, they have, but they didn't die. They came back, and what they were experiencing, whether it's heaven or hell or some other world or whatever it is, was all going on in their brain, in their subconscious and unconscious mind. When it comes to the other question, what happens after we go into the light, I was never able to say. Because whatever happens in terms of the soul's ascension or the spirit returning to the whole, I was always deprived of that information once the person entered the light. It was always barred to me. But then, two specific people showed me more. If you remember last year, my best friend from college, Peter, died of cancer. He'd been ill for a while, and it was a very, very sad moment. And I did his transition pictures, which I showed you. If you didn't see those pictures, I'll put them, the link to them in the show notes below this one. But he went through some difficult times. He was a committed atheist, and so there was a lot of ego stuff to be knocked off him. He had to be worn down as he went along. And ultimately, he just was curious about it, went into the light and vanished. But as he went into the light, I felt a sort of tingle of excitement on his behalf. There was something going on, like that was the end of that, and now I can begin this. I'm leaving that behind me, I'm now going on to this. It's hard to put words to what that feeling was, but it was a frisson, a something that suggested he experienced a new energy as he crossed from his ego side to the spiritual side. There was a memorial for him about a week and a half later, 2 weeks later, which strangely, given that he was an ardent atheist, was held in a crematorium next to a crucifix, and people sang hymns. He would have been furious. I half expected the casket lid to fly off and him to sit up and go, "Stop this! It's all nonsense." Because that's what he would have done in life, actually. But 3 weeks after he died, I thought, I wonder if I can go into his energy now and see where he is. And when I did, the pictures that came were really, really interesting and quite a surprise. There was a ring. You've got to imagine this because it's actually hard to explain. There was a big ring. It had metal divisions within it. I have only seen one thing like this before, which was a light, like a photography light, that had the same kind of divisions in it. But the important part was that Peter's energy passed through this ring and these divisions like a filter, and parts of him split off. He was divided into aspects of his self, which would include, I guess, ego, spirit, soul, personality, maybe. I don't know what the divisions are that we have, but there were several different divisions and they all went different ways, as though we are assembled from many different ethereal components and then at the end given a body and said, okay, there you go into the 3D world with these components in place and live a life. And then once we die and it's all over, then the individual elements, the components, are returned to some entity, some storage space, like consciousness goes and ego goes and personality goes, all this sort of stuff. Maybe. It seemed like it might have validity, but I had no way of knowing. However, all I can say is this is the second time that's happened. A couple of years ago, my father died. We weren't close, so there was no real grieving about it. He just died. And I did his transition pictures. I'll put those down below, a link to that particular video, because those were interesting too. He was in life a stage, well, he wasn't really on stage, but he was a magician. He was a member of the magic circle and all that kind of thing. Something that really didn't interest me at all because I don't like deception and stuff. But he spent decades perfecting magic tricks. Then on the day he died, the actual day, I did his transition, if you remember. And he wandered into that cave that I always see, that symbolic area. And there was space in the wall, and he could see billions of stars. Billions of stars. The entire universe was beyond that wall. And he thought to himself, real magic. He saw the workings of the universe and realized that his sleight of hand stuff that he'd been doing in life was just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the true magic that's available to all of us in the universe. It was a very moving set of pictures for me. But something I didn't tell you was that 6 months after doing those transition pictures, I thought, well, can I go into his energy again and see where he is now? Because I longed to answer that question, where do we go after the light? And this was fascinating because all I saw were tendrils reaching out, several of them, like 6 or 8 tendrils maybe. And they moved along, and there was a light, again, a very, very warm, creamy kind of light. And these tendrils went to different parts of that light and glommed on. Again, it was a separation of elements. So he had a division too, a splitting of who he was at a fundamental level into, in his case, various strands. And maybe it was the same thing. Maybe it was the various components: ego, personality, soul, consciousness, spirit, whatever those are. So maybe then, following on from that, we are simply built like robots, but of ethereal components that make us this time around. And then, once we have had this learning and growth experience on the planet in this incarnation, the components are disassembled, go back to source, and then we reappear later with various new components. But those may include old components too, like the soul, or elements of our personality or ego that bring fears with us into the new incarnation that we can then deal with. It's an ongoing thing. But I just found that the most fascinating thing with Peter and my father, that both had that disassembling of components going on. It's all part of something so much bigger and more complex than we will ever understand as mere humans. All right, that's all I got. But I'll see you very soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.